Welcome to the Steps to Baking series. This is a 13-part video series in which we take a closer look at each individual step of the bread baking process. From weighing out your ingredients to cooling your bread down after baking. Each of these steps is just as important as the next, and each of them will affect the end result. And this week, we'll talk about final shaping. This is the step that comes after bench resting, and will determine the final shape of your bread. Be it round loaves, oblong loaves, baguettes, focaccia, ciabatta, fougasse, pizza, rolls, buns, flatbreads, hachapuris, stuffed breads, braided loaves or soda bread. It could be anything. There's a technique for each of those. But like I said earlier, each of the baking steps affects the next. So how easily and how successfully your final shape will be directly determined by the fermentation, the pre-shaping, the bench resting. If your dough is super tough and you had not let it rest for long enough before taking this step, it will be near impossible to shape properly. And besides just struggling, you might just end up tearing your dough, and that will be an imperfection. Shaping any kind of loaf is a kind of a mastery in itself, which I can honestly say I have a lot to learn about still. They say that to shape a baguette properly, you need to shape about 1,000 of them. And that probably goes for most breads. But we're home bakers, so we let things slide, you know? And if it doesn't end up looking amazing, at least it will taste good, right? Or we can always start with something easy, like pita breads. And only later move on to high hydration sourdough bread that needs to be stitched and shaped tightly so it doesn't fall flat when it's baking. Now my videos are mostly aimed at beginners, so I have plenty of videos on my channel for basic dough, like these pretzels. Start with something simple like this, and once you feel more confident, move on to something like this, a hachapuri, which is a cheese-filled bread. It's like a Georgian pizza. It's absolutely delicious. But whatever you do, remember that practice makes perfect. And don't worry if you mess something up. Most of the time, you'll still probably have 2 or 3 pieces to practice on. Now here's an example of the simplest shaping that you can imagine. Soda bread. You take the piece of dough, you roll it into a ball, and that's your shape done. Or check out these sourdough BOEs. Similar to a bagel, but the hole doesn't go right through, and it's filled with a delicious filling of onions and meat. You can find recipes for all of these breads on my YouTube channel, where you'll find details on how exactly to shape them. The main things to remember are, after shaping, you should cover your dough so it doesn't dry out during final fermentation. When shaping your dough, make sure it doesn't stick. Use adequate amount of flour. But don't use too much, because that will make the dough slide around and impossible to shape. If it's a wet and stretchy dough, shape it tightly. If it's a dry dough, don't shape it too tight. If your dough is too tight, you might have a hard time expanding in the oven. In the next video, we'll talk about final fermentation. As always, if you have any questions or suggestions, write them down in comments. And check out all the other videos in the Steps of Baking playlist. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.